Hello. Oh, I was late to the microphone. Welcome to, yes indeed, Other World Connections. Yeah, I'm Gino. And yeah, you're tuned in to Revolution Radio. Studio A. Revolution Radio is the #1 listener supported internet radio enterprise. The whole world, yes. In the whole world. So please consider helping to support our efforts and airtime by visiting the station's donation section on our website, revolution.radio. You were just listening to The New American Dream with your host Chuck Gregory, and you can check out his show 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Thursdays Eastern Time on Studio A right here on revolution.radio. Yeah, so we got like a Discord. We broadcast through a Discord server. Yeah, so you can go onto Discord. You can follow the link on the website revolution.radio and join the gang there. Yeah, absolutely, you can do that. What else can you do? You can go to revolution.radio and have a look on the homepage, and there are ways you can donate. You can become a patron. You can donate through DonorBox, which is an international alternative to PayPal. You can make a direct payment. For North American residents only, you can donate through crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash. Doesn't even feel like you're losing any money. Checks, money orders can be paid there with all the details on the homepage there. And with the Discord server joining in there, you can have a look there. I've said the word there quite a few times in the last 2 minutes. Yes. Oh, and there's a mission statement which I haven't read that out loud before, but that looks very cool. But yeah, so it's listener supported, and that's like pretty amazing. That's super cool. And yeah, so it's late night schedule. It's 10 p.m. Eastern time on a Thursday. Yeah, so you might be, you might be bundled up in bed, wanting to go to sleep. Right before you go to sleep is a great time for contemplation. How are you going to achieve this? How are you going to do this? You wake up receiving, oftentimes, answers. One of the reasons social media is so bad, because we tend to do our social media right before we go to sleep, and it's the exact inversion of what we are ideally able to achieve and what we should. Well, it's not really a should, it's just what we have the magical power to do before we sleep as human beings. We can activate something very magic inside ourselves. We can tap into the collective unconscious. We can kind of communicate with it by bringing a conscious question into the realm of sleep, and we can wake up in the morning with a day that presents a solution. Pretty darn cool. And with AI, we tend to lean on, and in a way we're probably overtrained with AI because of things like Google searching, which is really, in a way, it's been our oracle for the last 20 years. And then that AI has become a more hyper-materialized oracle of that sort. Point of the story is other world connections. We're trying to make those other world connections, those, that part of reality that connects us with God, the gods, with one another, with ourselves, with solutions to slavery, solutions for freedom. And here on Other World Connections, I have a sinking suspicion that fairy tales are where it's at. My journey through life. And how I've ended up here right now, 8 minutes past 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 minutes past 4 p.m. New Zealand Time, Central Plateau of the North Island of New Zealand, right by where the wildfires were. I've got a sinking suspicion that right now it's all about fairy tales. And Marie-Louise von Franz, Carl Jung's most famous student, said something along the lines of that fairy tales contain the most basic, simple, and maybe she said profound explanations of archetypes, and in fairy tales we can find aspects and unfold aspects of ourselves and others and dynamics in the world, really. Something along those lines. I am paraphrasing. I suspect bringing fairy tales back to life, the consciousness of people, humanity, is just my little piece of work that I'm trying to do here on the show. Hope that makes sense. I'm going to read you. We've been looking at Snow White. I found an essay from the website soundingbowls.com. I think it's a philosophical blog. And this is Snow White and the Path of Awakening. And I thought, this person, Tobias K., well, made the effort to write a full essay. And I think because of that, and we've been studying Snow White, I think it's worth reading until it's not worth reading anymore. And then we're going to move on to the forgotten rule of fairy tales that can change your life. Well, that sounds the kind of thing that it's right up Otherworld Connections alley. Improving or changing your life through fairy tale. That is what we're looking for here. We're not rewriting them, we are reconnecting with them. That's what we're doing. And then we're going to look at the psychology of fairy tales, which should have and between the two, there should be some of Marie von Franz's work. And if not, well, buckle up for next week, because we're going to play either a 2-hour interview with Marie-Louise von Franz that was televised, and we may, if you please, start a 9-hour documentary by her. We may do that, because I'm here to learn too. We look at fairy tales and we end up at talking about origins, human origins. People want to bring up the stellar cult. Well, I just want to bring up the fairy tale cult these days. Doesn't matter where a fairy tale comes from. Well, it'll make me look smarter if I knew, or if I claimed to know. But that's not what it's about. We can pick up a book and have a fairy tale sitting right in front of us, and we can do our darndest to figure out what the heck that means archetypically, symbolically, serendipitously, synchronistically, in a way that we're sort of reading a fairy tale in a way is shadow work. That's what I'm trying to get down to in the nitty-gritty, and I want to be able to eloquate that. I want to be able to sit there and say, this is the point of a fairy tale. Or I want to have a conversation with someone and patronize them and say, well, you should be reading, or this reminds me of this fairy tale. I think we can pick up aspects of ourselves in fairy tales and find a solution there. So it's going to take a long time. And that's what Otherworld Connections, for the meantime, is going to be about. With the year fast approaching its close, 14th of November, 13th of November probably for you, Oh, how are we going to pull this off? We're going to pull it off step by step. I'm just going over to the chats. I just want to see if there are any signs of life before I press play. No signs of life? No problem. No problem whatsoever. Alright, let's start reading. So, let me bring up. Do. Yeah. Brings that up. Go to that one. Yeah. Not sure how I'm going to achieve this. Should be working for me. There we go. Just takes a minute to pick up. Alright. Okay, here we go. This is Snow White. Snow White and the Path of Awakening. Fairy tales are the mythology of the individual soul. We are not simply who or what we think we are. Within each of us is a whole cast of characters, and we are both the hero and heroine of the story as well as having every protagonist within us. More than that, we are the listener and the teller. These stories speak truth to the dreaming self, that non-linear, non-logical aspect of ourselves that lies dreaming within our everyday life, yet steers so many of our actions and reactions. Sounding bowls work deep into the dreaming self, touching and releasing trauma. Oh, so this website is actually, how ignorant of me, sounding bowls. So somebody crafting that crafts sounding bowls and wrote a blog about Snow White. Very, very cool. Okay. So yeah, this is already cool because it's like fairy tales as a, device, as a tool. And that's what we're trying to get to. So, sounding bowls work deep into the dreaming self, touching and releasing trauma, creating connections between our linear head thinking and our spirit child, heart awareness. You can see this fact in the way that newborn babies respond, in the way that the heart and breath monitors show changes when sounding bowls are played in intensive care units. You can see this fact in the way that so many people respond to sounding bowls in situations where other instruments do not touch them. The fairy tale Snow White is a good place to start discovering what is happening in our dreaming self. The Brothers Grimm were deep spiritual seekers with their own awakening, and leading members of the secret society of the Rosy Cross as it was then formed. Now, I haven't found evidence of that, but some people have said that. I buy it. I buy into that big time. Their stories were so powerful in their time that a whole new concept of being German was born through this work, as well as through their clarification of German as a language, in which they were incredibly thorough. They stood up for fair rule and were punished for resisting unfair laws passed by the king. It was largely their influence that focused a movement through which Germany became united in one nation. Such is the power of culture. Alright, excuse me everybody. I think I have a loose cable / connection going on. That's my theory. Alright. When Walt Disney picked up this story in the 1960s, he too was aware of its powerful status as a creation myth of individual awareness. Walt had his own agenda, in accord with the hidden societies of which he was also a member. Retitling it Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, he focused on the twee and over-dramatized the stepmother, such that we are distracted from the core message of personal awakening. In following the story, you may wish to remove from your mind images of his parody and read the original Grimm's Tale. Yeah. So there we go. We do want to get into that a little bit. I think it's more that fairy tales are have almost fallen under the brand of Disney, where it's more a branding thing than actually the thing they are supposed to be. And I think that's probably the biggest, quote unquote, psyop out of this whole, Disney fairy tale malarkey, rather than, shadows of a phallus, shadows of a man's phallus on the Lion King or something like that. It doesn't work like that. In terms of what's bad for kids, it's the TV set itself. It's the fondle slab itself, the iPad itself. Sorry to say. Alright, Tobias also expands on this story from a social media perspective in this video. I'm thinking we should just do justice to this person. Let me middle mouse click on that. Let's have a look.
The Black Mirror.
Snow White and the Black Mirror, sounding bowls and with the hearts. How long is that? 7 minutes. Okay, well, let's hold that thought. So he's expanding particularly on the mirror the Queen used to bolster her ego and what that reflects in today's culture. If we look more deeply into the way of truth and love as practiced by the Rosicrucians, Pat Rabbit in the chat. It's a quick hi there. Hello, dude. How are ya? So yes, as practiced by the Rosicrucians, the way of truth and love, we see that images are used as a way to understand truths that cannot be pinned down in the scientific sense. This is symbology. Ultimately, our ability to function well in the world is self-generated in the way we see. The way we understand is equally important with empirical facts. Thus, understanding this story through the images it offers in the context of the Rosicrucian/alchemical worldview of the Brothers Grimm offers insights into the way of awakening. I agree. The story begins with snow falling like feathers from heaven. This can be seen as a reference to the spirit self approaching a new incarnation. And yes, many fairy tales are decoded with many fairy tales are decoded by way of the story of reincarnation or incarnation. A number of people observe the symbology in fairy tale as that, which is, I would say, one plane to, or one level to look at it as. I'm looking to be more particular and current in the sense that there are loads of fairy tales, and I don't think they all explicitly mean exactly the same thing every time. Otherwise, well, there'd only be one story. Okay. colour is very important here, with the black window frame outlining our picture of white snow and then red blood, as the pregnant queen, pricks her finger. Black is, in alchemy, the background, the starting place, father spirit of all things. The black window frame outlines here the pure white of spiritual attainment, the goal of all things. The red blood falling on the snow is the third colour in this image, completing the set that defines alchemy. Red within the black and the white holds out the offer of transformation, reminds us that our passionate nature must be experienced if we are to engage with the full picture of our lives. Cooling our passions is also important, which might be why we see blood on snow here. The queen dies in childbirth. Newborn little Snow White is left alone. The king marries again. The stepmother enters the picture. In the fairy tale context, the birth mother is an image of nature, our true mother, and the stepmother is an image of society. The norms that cruelly bend us into something other than our true selves. Once we are born, we begin to lose contact with nature and to enter the world of socialization. And now I'll step out of that and say, well, that is similar to, the devouring mother that Jordan Peterson spoke of as what really he believes Snow White is a warning of, and to take the fairy tale directly as a warning, because there's a warning vibe to a lot of fairy tales, which is a reason for people cancelling them. Like, we don't need to scare, a warning. Warnings are perceived as threats, which are perceived as violence, which are perceived as something to intimidate and scare people, which is the chain of thought that goes into removing fairy tales from the zeitgeist of childhood. And I think that's wrong. But if we see it as like just sort of, there is a slight sort of a warning or a, heads up in your life, there are, evil, maternal figures that are going to assume a type of power over you as a maternal figure and use that to dominate, prevent, and destroy you. Good to know. Thank you. Very good to know. It's very good to know when you're a kid too, actually. Kids are smart. So, just that sort of just under the surface type, work that Jordan Peterson did, and obviously not to undermine that at all. It's Jordan Peterson, like, who am I? But the point of my story there is that this guy, what's his name? Tobias K, is already picking up on a theme of, the cruel mother aspect of society itself. And this is a correspondence, right? And, how everything's connected, i.e. like the law of vibration, that everything's connected. And then there are correspondences to between smaller and larger worlds or planes of existence. And what we see in the family dynamic, we do see on a society, a community, country, society type level, or a global level as well. And so, we're seeing this pick up here. There isn't a huge amount of work on these things, right? But we are picking up on trends based on also, and we have our own eyes and minds to think about what these things might mean. So yeah, where were we? Yeah, the birth mother as an image of nature, our true mother, and the stepmother as an image of society, and the norms that cruelly bend us into something other than our true selves, where it's like a sort of a pressure. And yeah, pressure within the family and pressure in society, towing the line. Well, do you agree? Yeah. Do. And yes, I'm getting hellos. I'm getting a audio confirmation from Diane. My audio is so much better. Appreciate that. Yeah, that's really good. With so much head scratching, I mean, I can't remember how I got there. But I'm there. Yes, so stepmother as, this devouring mother as, stepmother being representative of society, or quite literally that type of maternal person, bad, devouring, consuming maternal person. These things reflect in society. And on that note, I must do the right thing here, and I'm going to go to the schedule because somebody speaks about this explicitly every single week here on Revolution Radio. And maybe she wouldn't cross the street to do wheeze on me if I was on fire, but that's okay. It's not about that, but it's about this lady who's been doing this work for a very, very long time, and her show is called The Family Industrial Complex, and I'm really hoping she's still on Revolution Radio. I'm just going through the schedule because I am all out of whack, and it is the Family Industrial Complex. Oh, complex, very complex. Family Industrial Complex. Oh dear. Yes, no, here she is. Catherine Waters. The Family Industrial Complex. Why can I not say that today? Studio B, Wednesday, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. The title of her show, The Family Industrial Complex, is explicitly the title of the concept, which is also real and observable, which Catherine Waters tries to eloquate week in, week out for God knows how long she's been doing that. That dysfunctions inside the family can correspond to dysfunctions in society. Global wars, representing disruptive familial dynamics that go on within the home. And I guess there are other levels in between. So yeah, on that specific topic, it's Catherine Waters. The Family Industrial Complex, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Wednesdays, Studio B, right here on Revolution.radio. So yeah, smart cookies around. There are very smart people around. And so, going back to this fairy tale malarkey, there is a theme in Snow White of this, erroneous familial dynamic. Clearly. We can just check that box and say, yes, indeed. There are other things too. How can we gather from the planets as Snow White and the 7 planets, and how can we gather from that what that has to do with bad behavior and maternal figures on planet Earth, for example? I don't know. So I think we're just keeping it where we're keeping it for now. All right, so once we are born, we begin to lose contact with nature and enter the world of socialization, a step on the path, part of the blackness of life, a journey that strengthens the focus on ourselves, our ability to realize our potential and become who we truly are. And that's like that. I mean, how many allegories would you need for that to help everybody? I think you need a lot, and that's where my kind of view on things is, or my focus on things. What about all the people that just don't become who they're truly meant to be? What about people who fight to become something they weren't even meant to be? People that just go with the flow? Or, hey, you know, my controlling mother didn't want me to do that, so I never did that. That's a big black hole that requires a lot of help and assistance and encouragement and support and education. An allegory, right? Look at what the government doesn't want us to do, or hinders us from doing. And look at what the government takes from us. What could we be without the government? So on and so forth. How are we for time? Things are going in slow motion for me today. I hope they are not for you. Yes. Yep. Just confirming that Catherine Waters is still in the house. Yeah, on Revolution Radio Studio B. So yeah, that's like a big topic, and you know, a topic that's really right up there. It's up there. It does kind of come down to shadow work, because part of shadow work is accepting how others in your life affect you, and you know, it might be their fault. But it doesn't mean it's their responsibility to do something for you. It's your responsibility to do something for you, even if it's their fault. And that's a big grey area in the spiritual, psychological, healing and help industry. There's a lack of clarity there. Alright, okay, I'll just read another paragraph or two of this so we get kind of an idea. The stepmother, new to queenship, has a deep insecurity. She fears she is not good enough and turns continually to her mirror for reassurance. This mirror tells her she is the most beautiful woman in the land. Who amongst us does not have an inner voice that reassures us we are special, the best, unique in our own skills? This voice of the lower ego comes from our distorted self-reflection. Based on fear, it panders to our arrogance, creating more fear. If we listen to this voice, if we become ruled by it, we too risk turning into a despot. Inasmuch as any part of us listens to this voice, that part of us will play a despotic role in our inner life. The fairy tale that is me, my dreaming self. The false queen hates the inner child because of her innocent beauty. It can be a bitter lesson to discover that our desire to appear significant in the world actually hates and wants to destroy the spirit child within. Yeah, this is really good. Our inner queen may speak sweet, even spiritual words, but she will kill to remain in control, much like mummy government, which does destroy the spirit child within, in the words of Mr. Tobias K. here. As Snow White grows up, her beauty matures. This tells us that our inner child, our spirit self, begins to be noticed, has an effect on the world. At this moment, the queen's mirror ego warns her that her supremacy is at risk. Her fury is a turning point in the story. We know viscerally that our inner control freak will stop at nothing. We know things no longer work as they are. The colors here are yellow and green. Two colors important to alchemy as catalysts in the transformation of the base nature into pure and beautiful. Yellow is jaundice to the queen, threatening her beauty through her own impurity. To the listener, it is the confirmation that change is coming. a sun-coloured warming of the cold white. White may be perfection, but it is not progress. Green is bile in the queen, but it is also telling us that life itself is present and all will be well. Alright, there's a fair bit of colour symbology. I think the sounding bowls are usually coloured, right? Colour coordinated. Yeah, so you know what? I am going to move on. I'm just going to play this little video. This is Tobias K. in conversation with Mike Puskas, Alchemy of Grace, LearnWorlds.com, and SoundingBowls.com. The Black Mirror, Snow White, and Awakening. Well, they got a thing or two to say about Snow White, and so, well, gosh darn it, we're going to listen. Here we go.
The Black Mirror. There's so many themes weaving here, yeah, and so many ways of approaching it. So we'll just look at the Black Mirror for a moment, yeah. The Black Mirror, of course, is the screen. Yeah, when you switch it off, it's black, and you see your own reflection in it. When you switch it on, you get human culture thrown at you, yeah, and in a sense, that's also your own reflection. And if you go onto social media, then you type in your thoughts and feelings, and you get replies back, yeah. That's very much your own reflection. Yeah. So the Black Mirror. In the is it Snow White? Yes, it is, isn't it?
What exactly?
In the Snow White myth, the queen, the false mother.
Wicked Queen looking at mirror, mirror on the wall. Yeah.
That one, mirror, mirror on the wall. Yeah, that mirror is reflecting her back to her as the most beautiful person in the world. Yeah, I mean, that's what we're looking for on social media. You type in and people go, oh yeah, aren't you lovely? Or yeah, I agree with you there. You know, and you get your what's called an echo chamber. Yeah, this is that same experience. You are the most beautiful. Yeah, this is what the everyday self, the shadow self, the ego, the Freudian ego wants. It wants to be seen as the most beautiful. Yeah, so and it's said very clearly in that fairy tale, this mirror is evil.
Yeah.
Another way of saying it, this mirror is black. Yeah. So this is what's happening. And who is Snow White? Snow White is the innocent soul. Snow White is the life force in us. Snow White is the joy in life itself in us. Yeah. And that is thrust out into the woods. Yeah. Kill it. Yeah. But it doesn't die.
No.
Because the forces that we sent to kill it are only obedient to us up to a certain point. Yeah, but because they too are life. Yeah, even though they're working as a huntsman, as a killer of life, they are still life. Yeah, and then Snow White finds the dwarves, the underground forces, the subconscious forces. Yeah, the planetary forces. There are 7 dwarves, 7 planets. Yeah, they're streaming into us, and they keep us alive. They feed us. Yeah. And the innocent life force in us feeds them and makes their life beautiful. That's what they want, yeah? They come back from work, from digging for beauty in the darkness, and we feed them. The life force in us feeds them a meal and makes them, it's all worth it, yeah? So that the Snow White is the beauty within the human being that is so needed in the world. The whole world is looking for that. Yeah, the planets themselves are streaming into the earth looking for that. Yeah, but when we, the false ego, the false mother, yeah, catch sight in the Black Mirror that this spirit is still alive, we go after it and we try and kill it again. Yeah, and eventually it's preserved in a glass coffin. You know, so we've got. The human spirit becomes a museum item.
Yeah.
And now, at last, we get somebody who is spiritually awakened, who is upright in themselves, a prince. Yeah, and it doesn't matter whether it's a male body or a female body. Yeah, the uprightness in themselves is a masculine ability that every human being has. Same as compassion and caring is a feminine ability that every human being has. So we're all balanced in us. Yeah. So the Prince force finds in the museum consciousness of the human being, look, there was a life force. Look, there was a princess. Look, there was something which celebrated beauty and joy. I want it. I want it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in our rush, we break the museum consciousness.
You break the museum consciousness.
Yeah. And the life force goes, ah, 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 and comes back to life. Yeah. But to do that, we have to turn away from the black mirror.
Well, my brother, do you believe we have the courage to do that?
Where does courage come from?
And you see that again in the Snow White myth. Yeah, the first thing that the queen takes when she finds out that Snow White is still alive, she takes a comb and sticks it in her hair and fixes her thinking. Yeah, and then she dies. The life force dies if the thinking isn't constantly regenerating. Her lovely flowing golden hair becomes tied up in a bun or whatever it is. Yeah, and fixing the comb fixes the thinking, and she dies. And when the gnomes, the planetary forces, pull the comb out and the thinking is free again, she comes back to life. And the second time, it's ribbons to do up the bodice, yeah? And she fixes the feeling. Instead of breathing deeply, yeah, she becomes uptight like the Elizabethans were, you know, in their corsets, and can't feel things properly. And again, the life force dies, yeah? And the gnomes undo it. And the dwarves undo that, and she breathes again. Yeah. But when that gets down into the will, and here we touched on transhumanism. Yeah. When that gets down into the will, and we eat you see, the will is the digestion, our actions and our digestion. The digestion is the symbol of what we do in the world. Yeah. And you understand that in the digestion, we destroy everything we take in. Yeah. There isn't anything we eat that we don't destroy. By the time we're finished with it, it is feeling shit. Yeah. And then as soon as we've made shit out of the beauty we take in, we chuck it away.
We chuck it away.
We chuck it away. And this is the negative side of the human being that we have to come to terms with. Yeah. And this is where she gets stuck. She gets impounded. She gets compacted. Yeah. And she can no longer chuck it away. She can no longer digest it. Yeah? And we have to learn to breathe and to have free-flowing thinking right down into our digestion, so that our actions don't come out of our destructive nature, but come out of our willingness to breathe the air that is everybody's, and our willingness to think the light that comes from the myriad lights of the sky. Yeah? And when we stand up in our uprightness as human beings with free thinking, free feeling, and more conscious action, then we go forward as human beings.
I'm just going to read
the air that is everybody's, and our willingness down into our digestion, so that our actions don't come out of our destructive nature, but come out of our willingness to breathe the air that is everybody's, and our willingness to think the light that comes from the myriad lights of the sky. Yeah? And when we stand up in our uprightness as human beings with free thinking, free feeling, and more conscious action, then we go forward as human beings.
What an absolute legend. What a character. Tobias K. Well, I've subscribed, and that will not be the last we hear of Tobias K. Well, he's a very likable, animated person. Yeah, it was interesting. He talked about, you know, the lights in the sky. So those are the stars, those are the planets, right? I don't know. I just think I feel like it's not about crowbarring it in, but this Snow White and the Seven Planets thing, I really want to be able to tie everyone's work in to something that has some substance. But Tobias K. was sort of saying awareness of, you know, the knowledge of the stars. In a sense, that's kind of what I picked up from him. And probably, you know, it's the same thing. Studying the stars, studying the fairy tales. Probably there are, you know, pluralities there. And correspondences, that kind of thing. So yes, 4:48. Let's look at what else we've got to go on. 20-minute video. Or 47-minute video. Right, straight into this one. The forgotten rule of fairy tales that can change your life.
You ever notice how some stories, fairy tales, myths, old folk tales stick with us long after we've heard them? Even when we grow up, they still echo in the back of our minds. It's almost like they're whispering something important, some hidden truth about life. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, believed exactly that. And one of his closest collaborators, Marie-Louise von Franz, spent decades trying to understand what fairy tales are really teaching us. And here's the crazy thing. After years of study, von Franz came to a surprising conclusion. Fairy tales don't give us one clear answer on how to live life. They actually contradict each other constantly. In one story, you're told to fight the dragon, and in another, you're told to run away. One story says, always tell the truth. Another says survival depends on lying. One says, endure suffering with patience. Another says, strike back or you'll be crushed. Kind of confusing, right? But here's where it gets interesting. This contradiction isn't a mistake. According to von Franz, it's the point. Life itself is full of contradictions. Sometimes fighting is right. Other times retreat is wiser. Sometimes lying protects you. Other times it rots your soul. Fairy tales mirror that reality. They aren't giving us a single instruction manual. They're giving us a mirror to see the messy complexity of human existence. And this is where von Franz had her breakthrough. She realized that because the stories contradict one another, we're forced to choose. And in that choice, in that moment where we say, I could do A or B, but I'm going to choose C, my own way, that's where individuality is born. Now, if you think about it, this explains so much about why life feels so hard sometimes. People crave certainty. We want clear rules that always apply, black and white answers. But life isn't black and white. It's a swirl of yes and no, of left and right, of fight and flight. And when you're stuck in the middle of contradictions, that's where you actually get to define yourself. You don't just copy what everyone else does. You carve out your own path. Von Franz even admitted that at first she hated this realization. She had been hoping for timeless answers, things that would always be true, no matter where or when. But instead she got this chaotic tangle of contradictions. Over time, though, she began to see the beauty in it. Without contradiction, there's no freedom. If stories only told us do this and never that, we'd be robots programmed, predictable. But because fairy tales are full of both and yes and no, we get to choose. We get to become who we really are. But stay with me here, there's one exception. One thing that no fairy tale ever contradicts. No matter the culture, no matter the age, not once does any story go against this rule. You must never harm the helpful animal. Sounds simple, almost childish, doesn't it? Don't hurt the helpful animal. But in Jungian psychology, this has a much deeper meaning. The helpful animal isn't just some sidekick in the story. It's a symbol of your inner compass, your intuition, your gut instinct. That quiet voice inside that tells you when something feels right and when something feels wrong. Von Franz explained that every helpful animal in a tale points to that deep, instinctive wisdom inside us. It doesn't come from logic. It doesn't come from society's rules. It's primal. It's raw. It's the part of you that knows, without needing to explain why, that a certain path is yours. And Jung himself tied this directly to the idea of conscience. Think about that word for a second. Conscience. Its root literally means with knowledge. Jung said it's not just knowledge in the brain. It's knowledge about the emotional weight of our actions. It's that feeling in your chest when you know you shouldn't do something, or that surge of conviction when you know you should, even if it's difficult. That, according to Jung and von Franz, is the helpful animal. And the universal lesson of fairy tales is, don't betray it. Don't kick it away. Don't silence it because it clashes with rules, traditions, or social expectations. Once you hurt that voice, you're lost. And let's be real, most people do hurt it. We all know that feeling. You sense something is wrong, but you push it aside because others are pressuring you. Or maybe you want acceptance so badly that you ignore your gut and go along with the crowd. Outwardly, you might succeed, you please your boss, your family, your community, but inwardly, you pay the price. You start to feel hollow. Jung warned about this exact thing. He said society's laws and customs can look righteous, but they can also be a mask, a cleverly disguised lie. And even if everyone applauds you, even if by all appearances you're doing the right thing, deep down there's that whisper. Something's not right. That whisper doesn't go away. You can ignore it, hide it, drown it in distractions, but it haunts you. You feel like you're living a life that isn't truly yours. You feel fake. And over time, that fakeness eats you alive. The Russian novelist Dostoevsky saw this too. He argued that our conscience is what makes us human. Deny it long enough, and you don't just feel dishonest, you feel sick. Shame gnaws at you. Guilt drags you down. It's like a sickness of the soul. And no matter how good life looks on the outside, the inside feels like it's rotting. So let's pause and think about this. Every fairy tale says, in its own way, protect the helpful animal. Don't betray your inner compass. Because your conscience isn't something extra you can ignore, it's what holds your entire self together. Now here's where it gets tricky. Jung warned that not all voices inside us are trustworthy. There's a true conscience, the one that leads toward growth, integrity, and wholeness. But there's also a false conscience, one that masquerades as the voice of truth, but twists everything. This false conscience convinces you to call evil good and good evil, and it does it with the same force and emotion as the real one. This is dangerous. How many times have we seen people justify cruelty, corruption, or selfishness because they felt called to it? That's not conscience speaking. That's the false animal, what Jung sometimes called the devil or tempter. So how do you know the difference? Jung offered a clue. If your inner voice is rushing you, pushing you to act in haste, overwhelming you with urgency, it's probably not your true conscience. As he loved to say, all haste is of the devil. That's why it's so important to slow down when you're facing a deep moral choice.
All right. You're tuned into Revolution Radio. We've got the ad break coming up. Stick around and we'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome back to Otherworld Connections. You're tuned in to Revolution Radio. This is Studio A, and it is 3 minutes past 11 p.m. Eastern Time. 3 minutes past 5 on a Friday afternoon down here on the central plateau of the North Island of New Zealand, where we had allegedly a wildfire. I don't know what the point of that story is, but we had a few days of sunshine and the fire kicked off. And then everybody was praising Jesus 2 days later when the rain put the fire out. I thought they only had to wait a couple of days for rain. It rains all the time down here. All the time. So, yeah, they should have really just had a barbecue instead. But yes, Agenda 2030 is well underway. I don't think it's a coincidence that they are putting now the iwi, the local tribes, are putting plans in place to prohibit entry to parts of the region for safety, quote-unquote, purposes. Yes, we are all being ferried into the cities and blocked from entering national parks, nature spaces, and that's what seems to be happening. Yeah, well, anyway. What is the point of my story? We're looking at the forgotten rule of fairy tales that can change your life. Yeah, wonderful. Talking about freedom of choices, tales of morality, perhaps. That's what I think. A little bit of this video is inferring that, quoting Marie-Louise von Franz and Carl Jung, or in this video's case, Carl Jung, which the captions is reading as Zhang, as in Z-H-A-N-G, Zhang. Too funny. It couldn't be, Anyway. Say no more. Let's continue. Let's just keep going with this video. Here we go.
Don't act impulsively. Don't jump just because you feel a jolt of energy. Sit with it. Stew in the discomfort. Because in that waiting, sometimes agonizing waiting, the real path reveals itself. Marie-Louise von Franz put it perfectly. She said that when you stew long enough in the pain of these inner conflicts, something begins to form inside. A line, a direction, a clarity that wasn't there before. Only then can you move forward knowing this feels true to me, even if others disagree. But here's the hard part. You can never be absolutely sure you're right. Conscience isn't like GPS, you don't get a blue arrow on a map. In the end, you always take a leap of faith. You trust that inner animal, you trust the whisper, and you step forward risking that you might be wrong. And isn't that exactly what makes life real? If we always knew in advance the perfect choice, there'd be no courage required. Part of being human is walking into the unknown, guided only by that quiet animal spirit inside. Now, some of you might be thinking, yeah, but doesn't following your conscience sometimes cost you everything? Don't you risk rejection, alienation, being cast out? And yes, that's true. People who follow their conscience often stand against the crowd. They make choices their family disapproves of. They risk losing friends or jobs. It can be lonely at first. But listen to this. The South African writer Lawrence van der Post wrote that every human being has two contracts. One is with the community they're born into, its laws, traditions, expectations. But the other contract is deeper. It's the contract with life itself, and that second contract is sacred. If you break it, if you betray your own conscience, no amount of community approval will save you. You'll never know peace again. Think about that. Would you rather be at odds with your neighbors or at odds with yourself? Which pain would you rather carry? And that's where we'll pause for now, because part 2 is going to take us deeper into the dangers of ignoring conscience, how false conscience seduces us, and what it truly means to trust your inner animal in a world that pressures you to conform. So where we left off, we were talking about this deep, almost sacred rule found in fairy tales. Never betray the helpful animal. Never silence that instinctive inner compass we call conscience. Because when you do, you don't just lose your way for a moment, you start losing yourself. But here's the real danger. It isn't always obvious when you're betraying your true conscience. Because lurking right beside it is the false conscience, the impersonator, the trickster voice. And this false voice is convincing. It feels just as real, just as powerful. But instead of guiding you toward growth, it pushes you down destructive paths, disguised as righteousness. Think about someone who feels a compulsive need to sacrifice endlessly for others, even when it destroys their own life, or someone who gets caught up in rigid moral rules, unable to bend, all while looking down on everyone else. On the surface, it might seem noble, but at the core, it's not the animal of life guiding them. It's the wolf in sheep's clothing. Jung called this the devilish conscience. It exaggerates, twists, and can even call evil good if it serves its own agenda. And how do you tell the difference between the two? Jung gave us a clue: pace. A true conscience often comes with a sense of gravity, something steady and patient. False conscience is frantic, demanding, urgent. It screams, "Do this right now, before it's too late." And that panic, that rush, is almost always a trap. It's why Jung liked to say, all haste is of the devil. Hurry clouds judgment. Slowing down clears the fog. And this is something you and I can notice in our own lives. Think about the worst decisions you've ever made. Didn't most of them come from rushing, from panicking, from reacting too quickly? And think about the times you felt proud of a decision. Chances are, you took your time. You wrestled with it. You let it sit until the real answer slowly grew roots inside you. Now, of course, this doesn't mean your conscience always points to a life of ease and comfort. Sometimes it drags you down the most difficult path imaginable. It may push you to walk away from stability, to confront an injustice, to speak up when silence would be so much easier. And yes, that often comes at a cost. Friends may leave. Families may disapprove. Society may even punish. But here's the truth. The price of ignoring your conscience is always higher. Because the punishment comes from within. It manifests as guilt, regret, shame, and those things eat you alive far more than the criticism of others ever could. This is where Dostoevsky's perspective hits hard. He believed our conscience isn't just a psychological function. It's the very thing that makes us human. And if we betray it long enough, something in us starts to rot. We carry what he called a sickness of the soul. You can cover it with smiles, wealth, achievements, recognition, but late at night, when it's quiet, that sickness whispers, "You're not living the life you were meant to live." Now, all of this sounds heavy, right? But it's actually deeply hopeful. Because the moment you realize your conscience is the helpful animal that it's been there all along, you realize you're never truly lost. Even in the darkest night, there's still that flicker, that instinctive tug pulling you toward who you really are. And every single person has access to it. We just have to stop drowning it out with noise, with fear, with the opinions of others. But let's dig deeper into this idea of conflict between conscience and society. Because this isn't just some abstract psychological debate. This is your life. You've already felt it. You've had moments where your gut said one thing and the crowd said another. Maybe it was about your career path. Maybe it was about who you love or what you choose to believe. And in that moment, You stood between two contracts, the contract with your society and the contract with life itself. Lawrence van der Post said it beautifully. Every person has an inborn contract with life. That's your true purpose, your individual path. And yes, society has its own contract with you too. But here's the hierarchy: you can bend to society, but you must never betray your contract with life itself. Break society's rules, and you may be punished, maybe even outcasted. But break life's rules, break your conscience, and you'll lose inner peace forever. Ask yourself, how many people do you know who look successful, but have this hidden emptiness? They followed the rules. They played the game. They checked the boxes, but they silenced that helpful animal inside. And now, no matter how polished their life appears, they feel lost. Now I want you to pause and think about your own story. Can you remember a time when you betrayed your conscience? Maybe you agreed with the crowd even though it felt wrong. Maybe you stayed silent when you should have spoken up. At first, maybe it felt easier. But later, didn't it leave a sour taste? That weight that says, I should have been braver. Most of us have those memories. But here's the gift: our conscience doesn't hold grudges. It doesn't wait just to punish. It waits to guide always. The moment you choose to listen again, it responds. The animal returns. The whisper grows louder. The path clears. And here's another thing. Following conscience doesn't mean life becomes smooth. It might actually get harder. But what you gain is unmatched peace inside. Even when you face criticism, punishment, or loss, there's a sense of inner alignment, like you're finally living in rhythm with something greater than yourself. Carl Jung said that if the voice of conscience really is the voice of God, or at least something beyond our limited reasoning, then it holds a higher authority than any tradition, law, or cultural expectation. That means if conscience says, go this way, you go even if society disapproves, even if family protests, even if you stand alone, because in the end, you won't truly be alone. Life itself will be with you. Now, some people might challenge this and say, but what if I follow my conscience and regret it? What if I go astray? And here's where trust comes in. There are no guarantees. You won't always get it right. But life isn't about perfection. It's about authenticity, about being real. And if you act out of conscience, even if it leads to mistakes, those mistakes shape you into someone true, whereas living against conscience shapes you into someone false. This is where fairy tales give us another important lesson. The hero doesn't always win by perfection. In fact, most fairy tale heroes make mistakes, they stumble, they suffer, they doubt. But the one thing they never do, they don't betray the helpful animal. Even when things go wrong, they keep that bond alive. And in the end, it saves them. So here's the practical side of all this. How do you strengthen your bond with the helpful animal? You slow down. You give yourself silence, space, time. You listen to the emotions bubbling up before dismissing them. You let yourself stew in conflict without rushing to resolution. Because, as von Franz reminded us, when you stew long enough, clarity comes. And then you take the leap. You step forward, sometimes trembling, sometimes not sure, but you step with conscience as your guide. And every time you do, that bond grows stronger. The animal trusts you, and you trust it. It's worth remembering that this isn't a one-time decision. It's a lifelong dialogue. Life will throw you into endless contradictions. Should I fight or should I retreat? Should I speak up or stay quiet? Should I bend or should I stand firm? And each time, conscience whispers, and you must decide if you'll listen. But here's the key takeaway. You may lose approval. You may lose comfort. You may even stand on the outside looking in. But what you gain, the unshakable peace of living in harmony with your inner voice, is worth everything. Because when you protect the helpful animal, When you honor that voice, you don't just survive life's contradictions, you transform them. You stop being a prisoner of yes or no, and instead, you rise into your individuality. You become the person who says, "These are the rules. These are the opposites. But here's my way. And it's mine no matter what." That's the gift hidden in every fairy tale. That's why Jung told Marie-Louise von Franz, when you study fairy tales, you can study the anatomy of man. Because these old stories, with their talking animals and magical journeys, aren't silly. They're maps of the soul. And the universal rule on every map is clear: don't betray the animal. Don't betray your conscience. Because if you do, you lose yourself. But if you stay true, no matter how stormy the road gets, you'll find your way. So the next time you hear a fairy tale, don't dismiss it as just a children's story. Listen carefully. Somewhere in it, there's a whisper about your own life, about the battles you're facing, and the choices you're making. And if you listen closely enough, you might just hear the rustle of that helpful animal reminding you, "Stay with me. Don't hurt me. I'll guide you home."
All right. We're going to have a look at the psychology of fairy tales, and that video was cool. That was just a message in fairy tales is to follow your gut instinct. So yeah, let's just hit play on this. Let's do it.
Fairy tales occupy a special place in our lives as early as childhood. Bedtime stories is a tradition that goes back to an ancient way of life, where people would, after a hard day of work, light up the hearth and gather around the fire as night was approaching, when everyone had eaten and were satisfied. At this time, stories were told. There's something very earthy about this, something that contains a rich...
Oh, excuse me, I just was meant to check the chat, and Metal Rabbit said he's a dedicated imperfectionist. The idea of perfection on this plane of existence is repugnant. I'm still learning how not to be a perfectionist. But hey, I'm getting there. I break things down into steps. Which may be part of perfectionism, I don't know. But I think I have to break things down into steps, because otherwise the task seems a little too big, and that is probably part of perfectionism. Yes. And then it's also about try not to regret things, right? Acknowledge and then change and move forward. But yes, back to the video. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Metal Rabbit.
Source of nutrients for our soul. The word human and humility come from the Latin word humus, which means earth. Humility is considered as the greatest virtue. Those who are exalted are humbled, and those who are humbled are exalted. The hearth was such an integral part of a home that the concept has been used to refer to a household, as in hearth and home. Fairy tales fascinate us and give us a sense of warmth and homecoming that comes from the mythical realm of the imagination, a necessary complement to our everyday life. We are fundamentally storytelling creatures, and there's much we can learn by reflecting on the fairy tales heard in childhood. They seem almost magical because they connect us with emotions deeply buried within that cannot find expression in outer life, because as we grow up, the world of imagination is shunned by our peers, considered as unproductive and good for nothing. We are thus led to follow a linear path of study, work, and marriage. This becomes dangerous when it is too one-sided, and the archetype of eternal youth within us is repressed. Human life becomes a mechanical existence in which the magic of childhood, play, beauty, and creativity has left us, and life seems prosaic and without meaning. And when we cannot find meaning, we numb ourselves with short-term pleasures that seem, for a moment, to fill our inner vacuum. Fairy tales can provide us with a sense that we're not alone in our life struggles. Humans have faced these struggles in one form or another since the beginning of time, and fairy tales represent this fundamental concern of the human condition. When we read about heroes fighting dragons, it mirrors our own experience in life, with our own dragons representing the trials and tribulations of life, a difficult but necessary part of our path towards our ideal self. The treasure gained is what propels us towards self-realization. By understanding ourselves better, we can better understand others and the world around us. Each of us receives a call to adventure that we can either accept or reject. We can confront the difficulties that will gain us access to new treasures, or run away and risk falling into the abyss of anxiety, depression, and meaninglessness. Therefore, when we are confronted by difficulties, we should not be too sure this is a negative event. We may open up hidden places in our soul and reveal secret riches. Like a farmer who is plowing the fields, but one day his plow catches onto something and his work is interrupted. But then he discovers a secret entrance to a deep underground cave filled with treasures. After discovering the buried treasure, we have the task of integrating these deep realms of beauty in our daily lives. Trouble can interrupt our journeys for good reasons that we may not immediately grasp. Characters such as the trickster wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, the talking frog in The Frog King, the wicked witch in Hansel and Gretel, Rapunzel, the long-haired maiden in The Tower, or the princess and the pea are likely to remain in our imagination all our lives. The adventures fairy tales describe often reflect challenges we face in our journeys. They hide a wealth of insights just below the surface and are clearly more than mere entertainment for children. It is a great treasure to revisit stories that had an impact on us in our youth and the characters we liked or disliked. The term fairy tale was first used by French author Madame d'Aulnoy in the late 17th century. It belongs to the folklore genre, representing mythology, folk wisdom, moral lessons, and entertainment. Fairy tales contain a liminal space. They represent both the ordinary and the sacred realms. The hero or heroine leaves the mundane world and steps into the magical world, where he or she encounters the presence of magic, treasures, talking animals or objects, and mythical beings such as fairies, dragons, dwarfs, giants, elves, mermaids, witches, etc. The characters and motifs of fairy tales are archetypal, held by magical elements. Here we find all sorts of archetypes: the hero, the child, the shadow, the trickster, the fool, the wise old man, the maiden, the devouring mother, etc. Fairy tales represent the transition from our conscious everyday life to the unconscious and numinous other world, and back again to everyday life. The fairy tale can conclude with the character ending back in the ordinary world with fortune, or empty-handed with the relief of having survived and escaped from the devouring unconscious. When the fairy tale ends in the magical realm, it usually represents the tragic loss of the individual being swallowed by the unconscious. Let's take, for instance, the tale of Jack and the Beanstalk. Too poor to afford food, his mother tells Jack to sell their only cow. He exchanges it for some magic beans, but when he reaches his home, his mother is furious that he hadn't sold it for money and throws the beans outside. The next day, a huge beanstalk has grown. He climbs it and reaches a kingdom in the sky, where a giant and his wife live. He asks for food, and the wife kindly gives him some. When the giant reaches home, he smells the blood of an Englishman and wants to kill him, but the wife tells him that there's nobody there. Jack steals a sack of gold coins from the giant and climbs back down. He goes 2 more times and steals a hen that lays golden eggs and a magical harp that plays music by itself. Upon stealing the harp, it cries out to its master, and the giant furiously runs after Jack. But Jack quickly runs down the beanstalk, fetches an axe, and chops it down. The giant falls and dies, and Jack and his mother were now very rich and they lived happily ever after. Colloquially, the term fairy tale is used when describing something with a naively happy ending, or something unreal that is just a product of one's imagination. Psychologically, however, fairy tales reflect our inner landscape, and the characters can represent aspects of our own personalities. As we develop a deeper awareness of ourselves, we often find that stories reveal new symbolism and meaning that had hitherto been concealed. Sinister or wicked characters may represent aspects of ourselves that have been neglected or rejected. The deep dark forest is a common representation of the shadow elements within, all that is within you which you do not know about. The monsters live in the forest. The wilderness reflects parts of ourselves that are never entirely tamed, but always somewhat dangerous. This mysterious and terrifying place hides the treasure hard to attain. We all have to cross this dark path in our lives. Our first reaction is to wish we could avoid it. However, in hindsight, we often realize that these were enormously valuable moments that forced us to discover unknown parts of ourselves. Fairy tales occur both in oral and literary form. In the much more ancient oral tradition, fairy tales changed a bit every time they were told, and thus many local variants emerged. It is quite remarkable that many tales survived without being written, thanks to the power of storytelling. In literary form, the Indo-European fairy tale The Smith and the Devil is believed to go as far back as the Bronze Age. It is about a blacksmith who makes a pact with a malevolent being, later called the Devil, selling his soul for supernatural power and then tricking the evil entity out of his price. This reminds one of the Faustian bargain. Many of the tales we know today, such as Jack and the Beanstalk, Beauty and the Beast, and Rumpelstiltskin, have their roots in older tales that go back thousands of years. Prior to radio and newspapers, stories formed a great interest of the population, and one can imagine how a folk tale originates. Another theory of the origin of fairy tales is that they are remnants of degenerated literature. Until the 17th and 18th centuries, fairy tales were, and still are in remote primitive societies, told to adults as well as to children. They used to be the chief wintertime form of entertainment in agricultural populations. Fairy tale telling became a kind of essential spiritual occupation. Sometimes it is said that fairy tales represent the philosophy of the spinning wheel. Their allocation to the nursery is a late development, which probably has to do with the rejection of the irrational and development of the rational outlook. They came to be regarded as nonsense, old wives' tales, and good enough for children. It is only recent that we have rediscovered their immense psychological value. For many people, fairy tales or dreams need not to be looked at accurately, but may be distorted. Since it is not scientific material, one can just as well spin a little around it, pick what suits one, and discard the rest. That same strange, unreliable, unscientific, and dishonest attitude has for a long time prevailed towards fairy tales. Modern fairy tale adaptations usually omit a lot of strange or gruesome details present in the original versions. The Brothers Grimm were the first in Germany to collect fairy tales and arouse interest in other countries to do the same. They wrote down fairy tales literally, as told by people in their surroundings, but even they could sometimes not resist mixing a few versions. They were honest enough to mention it in footnotes or letters, but they did not yet have that scientific attitude which modern folklore writers and ethnologists try to have, of taking down a story literally and leaving the holes and paradoxes in it. The collection of fairy tales which the Brothers Grimm published was a tremendous success. There must have been a strong unconscious emotional interest, for in every country people began to make a basic collection of their national fairy tales. At once, everybody was struck by the enormous number of recurrent themes, which came up again and again in different countries. With this began the search for the remains of an old wisdom. In his essay on fairy stories, the English writer J.R.R. Tolkien views fairy tales as those that took place in fairy, an enchanted realm with or without fairies as characters. The Celts call them little people or good folk. There are, however, also evil fairies. In Irish legend, the changeling is believed to be a human-like fairy that had been left in place of a child stolen by other fairies. One belief surrounding the origin of fairies is that during the war in heaven, the rebel angels fell to hell and the triumphant angels stayed in heaven. However, there were another group of angels who remained neutral and so were caught in between, left to roam the earth as fairies. Through the use of fantasy, the reader can experience a world that is consistent and rational under rules other than those of the normal world. Fairy tales can provide moral or emotional consolation through their happy ending. Tolkien coined the word eucatastrophe, good catastrophe, to describe a sudden turn of events in which the protagonist is saved from what seems like an inevitable doom. This sudden turn creates a far more powerful and poignant effect of joy in serious tales of fairy. Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz focused much of her life in studying fairy tales and might well be considered as the first person to discover and demonstrate the psychological wisdom of fairy tales. She writes, "Fairy tales are the purest and simplest expression of collective unconscious psychic processes. Therefore, their value for the scientific investigation of the unconscious exceeds that of all other material. They represent archetypes in their simplest, barest, and most concise form. In this pure form, the archetypal images afford us the best clues to the understanding of the processes going on in the collective psyche. In myths or legends, or any other more elaborate mythological material, we get at the basic patterns of the human psyche through an overlay of cultural material. But in fairy tales, there's much less specific conscious cultural material, and therefore they mirror the basic patterns of the psyche more clearly. Myths such as Ulysses and Hercules express the national character of the civilization in which they originated, namely Greece. They are often more beautiful in form than fairy tales, so that some scholars are seduced into saying that the myth is the big thing and the rest just miserable remnants. Legends, on the other hand, are unverifiable events handed down from earlier times and believed to have been taken place in human history. Fairy tales, however, express the creative fantasies of the rural and less educated layers of the population. They had the great advantage of being naive and of having been worked out in collective groups, with the result that they contain purely archetypal material unobscured by personal problems. Therefore, a fairy tale can be understood across the world and is not limited to one's nation. Myths are nevertheless important because they can be used to make a bridge when you do not see what the fairy tale material means, for it is too remote from one's conscious world. Both myths and fairy tales help the human imagination narrate the meaning of life's events. One must tell things as they are, in their true and raw form, and not embellish them. Only then can one access the archetypal realm. Fairy tales mirror the most basic psychological structure of humans, and it is where one can best study the anatomy of the psyche. Therefore, it is a scientific study in which von Franz sought to understand the objective psyche, or what Carl Jung calls the collective unconscious, the home of archetypes, the inherited patterns of behavior of mankind. On the other hand, we have the subjective psyche, or personal unconscious, contents of personal acquisition that have been repressed or forgotten. This is the home of complexes, emotionally charged groups of ideas or images. Dreams mostly occur in the personal unconscious, while fairy tales represent the collective unconscious. Both, however, will constellate complexes and archetypes. The subjective view allows you to find the personal image that is contained within your emotions, providing an outlet for unconscious conflicts. But one must go further and look beyond oneself in order to find one's place in the primordial images of mankind, the objective view. The incidents in the magical realm of fairy tales are fundamentally similar to dream experiences, in that the enchanted world represents the unconscious. As Jung says, in our sleep we console the 2 million-year-old self, which each of us represents. one of the key practices in Jungian psychology is amplification. When we run out of personal associations of the images in our unconscious, whether they are the result of dreams, art, or active imagination, fairy tales can help us to better understand their symbolic content, because they amplify the personal content to the collective unconscious. In the Red Book, Jung speaks to a princess during active imagination. She tells him, "Be reasonable, dear friend, and do not stumble now over the fabulous, since the fairy tale is the great mother of the novel and has even more universal validity than the most avidly read novel of your time. And you know that what has been on everyone's lips for millennia, though repeated endlessly, still comes nearest to the ultimate human truth. So do not let the fabulous come between us." We should be using the wisdom of the tales to understand the problems we are facing collectively, but to stand in the collective issue and to look at the fairy tale is missing the mark. Rather, we have to look at the fairy tale and then at the contemporary issues. Though fairy tales have changed over time to adapt to society and cultural conventions, the archetypes have remained virtually the same. Von Franz tells us that approaching the meaning of a fairy tale is like stalking a very evasive stag. Just as for a dream, we divide the archetypal story into its various aspects, beginning with the first stage, exposition, time and place. They usually begin with once upon a time, which is timelessness and spacelessness, the nowhere of the collective unconscious. In this land of the soul, we almost always find some kind of constructed center, a castle, palace, four-cornered house, or a round lake with a mountain or island in the middle. The important processes take place in this center. It is here that we touch the central problem of the fairy tale. In the second stage, we turn to the dramatis personae, the people involved. It is recommended to count the number of people at the beginning and end. If a tale begins with, "The king had 3 sons," one notices that there are 4 characters, but the mother is lacking. One could suspect that the story is about redeeming the female principal. The third stage consists of naming the problem of the story, such as an old king who is sick. Finally, in the fourth stage comes the peripeteia, the sudden change of events, the ups and downs and climax of the tale, which concludes in either a good or bad ending. Just like the dream is its own best explanation, and the interpretation of the dream is always less good than the dream itself, so too the interpretation of fairy tales and myths are a darkening of the original light which shines in the material itself. This is a common critique of the Jungian interpretation. However, the method of non-interpretation is often not sufficient, for the person will be like someone with a chest full of treasures, but who has lost the key to opening it. And what is the use of that? Very often these treasures are not made use of, and people's lives are impoverished. Interpretation, however, has to be practiced, for people tend to interpret their own dreams and myths within the framework of their conscious assumptions. The way to check if an interpretation is satisfactory is if it clicks with one, and to watch one's dreams to see if they go in the same direction or if something is lacking that must be brought into consciousness. The psychologist can help to provide an objective view so that a person may find the key to unlock their inner treasure, but the work must finally be done by the patient himself. Von Franz writes, "I always tell students not to learn my lecture, but to try to interpret fairy tales themselves, for that is the only way to learn. Interpretation is an art, a craft actually, which finally depends on you yourself. The classes where everyone interprets the same fairy tale is almost a confession and a Rorschach test at the same time. That cannot be avoided, for you have to put your whole being into it." For von Franz, one of the most frequent ways in which archetypal stories originate is through individual experiences of an invasion by some unconscious content, either in a dream or in a waking hallucination. Here we can see how rituals from tribes can come into existence from the archetypal experience of an individual, and if the impact is strong enough, there's a need to spread the personal secret around and not keep it to oneself. It is our psychic structure which has produced these symbols. People don't have ideas, ideas have people. The experience is considered by the shaman as a vision which belongs to the tribe. The individual was merely the message carrier. We find many animal tales. However, although the characters are animals, they are at the same time anthropomorphic beings. From a psychological standpoint, they are symbolic animals, for the animal is the carrier of the projection of human psychic factors. In other words, they are human because they really do not represent animal instincts, but our animal instincts. For example, a tiger in a story is greedy. It is not the real tiger's greed that is represented, but our own tigerish greed. So, it is an anthropomorphic tiger. These represent one of the most ancient and basic forms of archetypal tales. Children below a certain age prefer animal stories, because other stories with princesses and devils require too many explanations. But if you say, "the dog said to the cat," then they listen most eagerly. So, it seems to be the basic material, the deepest and most ancient form of tale. Fairy tales are vital for our individuation process, where the unconscious is known and integrated into consciousness, and one becomes their own self. This is the goal of all humans in Jungian psychology. Different fairy tales give average pictures of the phases of individuation, shadow integration, anima or animus integration, dealing with the archetypal father and mother images, etc. All are valuable as they all point to the self. Von Franz states, "After working for many years in this field, I've come to the conclusion that all fairy tales endeavor to describe one and the same psychic fact, but a fact so complex and far-reaching and so difficult for us to realize in all its different aspects that hundreds of tales and thousands of repetitions with a musician's variations are needed until this unknown fact is delivered into consciousness, and even then the theme is not exhausted. This unknown fact is what Jung calls the self, which is the psychic totality of an individual and also, paradoxically, the regulating center of the collective unconscious. Every individual and every nation has its own modes of experiencing this psychic reality. If one trusts and follows one's inner voice, even if it brings one into conflict with a prevailing opinion, one lets oneself be guided by the unconscious, and the journey into the depths rewards one with unexpected riches. This is perhaps the core struggle in all fairy tales, and is represented as the great journey, the adventurous quest to find the treasure hard to attain. In the following section, we will be looking at some fairy tales. The first one will include an interpretation, and the rest will be without one, so that you may reflect upon them yourself. The Three Feathers. There was once upon a time a king who had 3 sons, of whom 2 were clever and wise, but the third did not speak much, and was called the Simpleton. When the king had become old and weak, and was thinking of his end, he did not know which of his sons should inherit the kingdom after him. Then he said to them, "He who brings me the most beautiful carpet shall be king." So he blew 3 feathers in the air and said, "You shall go as they fly." One flew up to the east, the other to the west, but the third flew straight up and didn't fly far, but soon fell to the ground. The brothers mocked Simpleton, who was forced to stay where he was. He sat down and was sad, but noticed that there was a trapdoor close by the feather. He raised it up and went down the steps. There was a door, and he knocked at it. He saw a great toad with a crowd of little toads, and Simpleton asked her for a fine carpet, and he received it. He thanked her and went away. The 2 brothers, who thought their brother was so stupid that he would bring nothing at all, did not trouble themselves to search and got some handkerchiefs. When Simpleton brought the beautiful carpet back, the king was astonished and declared that the youngest will inherit the kingdom. But the 2 others let their father have no peace, and said that Simpleton, who in everything lacked understanding, could not be king. So the king made a new agreement and said, "He who brings me the most beautiful ring shall inherit the kingdom." Again the feathers blew in the same direction, and Simpleton went back to the fat toad and told her he wanted a beautiful ring, which he was given. The brothers laughed at Simpleton for going to seek a golden ring, and simply brought some nails. When Simpleton brought back the ring, the father again said, "The kingdom belongs to him." The two eldest did not cease from tormenting the king until he made a third condition and declared that the one who brought the most beautiful woman home should have the kingdom. Simpleton went back to the toad, but the toad answered, "She's not at hand at the moment, but still you will have her." She gave him a yellow turnip, which had been hollowed out, to which 6 mice were harnessed. Then Simpleton said, "What am I to do with that?" The toad answered, "Just put one of my little toads into it." Hardly was the toad seated in the turnip when she turned into a fair maiden, the turnip into a coach, and the 6 mice into horses. So he kissed her and drove off quickly with the horses and took her to the king. His brothers did not trouble themselves to seek beautiful girls, but brought the first peasant women they came across. The king declared that his kingdom belongs to his youngest son. But the two elders kept complaining to the king and demanded that the one whose wife could leap through a ring which hung in the center of the hall should have the preference. The peasant women, who were strong, jumped, but were so stout that they fell and broke their arms and legs. The pretty maiden, however, sprang lightly as a deer. So he received the crown and has ruled wisely for a length of time. We can start our interpretation of this fairy tale by noting at the beginning that the king has 3 sons and the youngest is a fool. Many fairy tales start with a father and 3 sons, or a mother and 3 daughters. Often, but not always, we can relate this fourfold structure with Jung's psychological types: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. If thinking is one's dominant function, feeling is one's inferior function. The king represents the conscious and dominant function, while the youngest is usually the inferior function and is despised, ignored, or ridiculed. The 2 brothers are the auxiliary functions. This quaternity represents wholeness, a psychic image of the self. The 2 smart sons repeat the same things over and over, expecting a different result. The sick and old king is the main problem, which represents the failure of the prevailing conscious attitude, tired from overuse. This is a situation that happens most often in the second half of life, where our focus shifts from the outer world to the inner world, and a misalignment is frequently the cause of a midlife crisis, caused by a too one-sided approach in life. The king must tap into his inferior function, which makes the bridge to the unconscious, gaining him access to a realm beneath the earth, where the archetype of the Great Mother resides in the form of a toad, and she helps the fool with each quest. Here, the final task is the integration of the anima, the personification of all female psychological tendencies in man, which is also the archetype of life. Only then can the fool inherit the kingdom, a symbol of wholeness. As the old and rigid way of life dies, a younger and more capable energy is brought forth into one's life. Rumpelstiltskin. Once there was a miller who was poor, but who had a beautiful daughter. Now it happened that he had to go and speak to the king, and in order to make himself appear important, he said to him, "I have a daughter who can spin straw into gold." The king was pleased and told him to bring her to his palace. When the girl was brought to the king, he took her into a room with a spinning wheel and straw and said, "If by tomorrow morning you have not spun the straw into gold, you must die." So she was left alone in the room and had no idea what to do, and she grew more and more miserable, until at last she began to weep. But all at once the door opened, and in came a little man, and inquired about her crying. The girl answered that she had to spin straw into gold, but does not know how to do it. The mannequin asked what he would get in exchange if he did it for her, and she replied, "My necklace." So he began to work until all the straw was spun, and all the reels were full of gold. When the king came, he was astonished and delighted, but his heart became only more greedy. He had the miller's daughter taken into another room, full of straw, which was much larger, and told her to turn it into gold if she valued her life. The girl was crying, and when the door opened, the little man appeared again. This time, the girl gave him her ring, and he spun all the straw into glittering gold. The king came delighted, but grew still even more greedy, and took her to a larger room, and if she succeeds, she shall become his wife. This time, when the mannequin arrived, she had nothing to offer him, so he told her, "Then promise me, if you should become queen, I shall have your first child." Not knowing what else to do, she agrees. The king came in and found all as he wished, and she became queen. A year after, she had a beautiful child, and she never gave a thought to the mannequin. But suddenly he appeared, and she was horror-struck, offering the mannequin all the riches of the kingdom if he would leave her child. The mannequin took sympathy and gave her 3 days' time to find out his name, and if she found out, she would keep her child. So the queen thought the whole night of all the names that she had ever heard, and sent a messenger over the country to inquire for any other names that there might be. The first day and the second day passed, and she had not yet figured out his name. But on the third day, the messenger came back and told her that he had seen a man jumping on one leg and shouting, "Today I bake, tomorrow brew, the next I'll have the young queen's child. Ha! Glad am I that no one knew that Rumpelstiltskin I am styled." When the little man came in, she told him his name. He cried, "The devil has told you that," and in his anger he plunged his right foot so deep into the earth that his whole leg went in, and then in rage he pulled at his left leg so hard with both hands that he tore himself in two. The Frog King, or Iron Henry. In old times, when it was still of some use to wish for the thing one wanted, there lived a king whose daughters were all beautiful, but the youngest was the most beautiful. On a warm day, she went into the forest and sat down by the side of the cool fountain, and to pass the time, she would take a golden ball, throw it up, and catch it. The ball eventually fell into the well, and she could not find it. She began to
Alright, that video is just finishing off with, reading through some fairy tales. I thought they were going to pass comment on those last ones, but I don't believe they are. Well, I will probably watch the rest of that later. So yeah, that is the end of that. Coming up to the end of the show now, 56 minutes past 11 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's 4 minutes to 6 down here, 6 p.m. on a Friday down here in New Zealand. So yes, that was quite a rich video there, that one there. But hey, that's the end of that, and thanks so much for tuning in to Otherworld Connections here on Revolution Radio. I do appreciate it, and next week we're going to keep going, looking into these fairy tales. Okay, much appreciated, and thanks there from Metal Rabbit. Thank you, Metal Rabbit, for being around and chiming in. I do appreciate it. Much love, everyone. I'm going to stop streaming now, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care, and good night. Sleep well.